The harsh winter winds howled through the valley as Beatrice Gardiner trudged along the muddy path leading to her grandmother's cottage. The trees stood bare against the gray sky, their twisted branches reaching up like skeletal fingers. At 53, Beatrice's weathered face had known more sorrow than joy. The plague had claimed her husband 3 summers past, and her 2 grown children had perished in the Earl's War the following year. Now, word had reached her that her grandmother, whom she had not seen since childhood, had died at the remarkable age of 91, leaving Beatrice her small cottage and garden on the outskirts of Willowbrook village. It was not much of an inheritance, a crumbling stone dwelling and an overgrown plot of land, but to a woman who had been sleeping in the church vestibule since losing her tenant farm, it was shelter. As Beatrice approached the cottage, she saw it was in worse condition than she had feared. The thatched roof had collapsed in one corner, weeds had reclaimed what must have once been a garden, and the wooden door hung precariously from a single hinge. She pushed it open with a sigh. "Not much, but it shall have to do," she murmured to herself, setting down her small bundle of possessions, a cooking pot, a blanket, and a small pouch containing 3 copper coins. A soft whine startled her. From beneath the rotting table emerged a scrawny gray dog, its ribs visible through matted fur. The creature approached cautiously, tail wagging uncertainly. "So grandmother left me a companion as well," Beatrice said, kneeling painfully to offer her hand. "Are you hungry too, old friend? We share that fate." The dog sniffed her fingers and licked them gently. On his collar was a small brass tag that read Thistle. "Thistle," she repeated. A prickly name for what seems a gentle soul. That night, Beatrice slept on the dirt floor, sharing her thin blanket with Thistle, who curled against her for warmth. Despite the dismal circumstances, having the cottage meant she would not freeze before spring arrived. Tomorrow she would assess what could be salvaged. Dawn revealed the full extent of her inheritance's dilapidation. Inside the cottage, little remained beyond a table with 3 legs, a stool, a cracked clay basin, and a small chest containing her grandmother's few possessions, a threadbare dress, a wooden comb, and a curious small box sealed with wax that Beatrice set aside to examine later. Outside, the garden was a tangled wilderness. What might have once been orderly rows of vegetables was now an impenetrable thicket of weeds, brambles, and twisted vines. Only a small shed at the far corner of the property appeared somewhat intact, though its door was secured with a rusted padlock. Thistle bounded through the overgrowth, occasionally stopping to dig frantically at certain spots before looking back at Beatrice with expectant eyes. "What are you about, dog? We have no time for games," she chided, though her tone was gentle. "We must clear enough land to plant something, or we shall starve by midsummer." For 3 days, Beatrice worked from sunrise to sunset, clearing what she could of the garden with a broken sickle she had found propped against the cottage wall. The work was grueling, and her hands bled from the thorns and sharp stones, but gradually she uncovered what appeared to be ancient, orderly rows beneath the chaos. On the 4th morning, as Beatrice prepared to continue her labor, Thistle barked insistently at the locked shed. "Not now," she said firmly. "Without a key, that padlock will not yield." But Thistle persisted, scratching at the ground near the shed's foundation. To quiet him, Beatrice investigated and discovered a loose stone that, when removed, revealed a small cavity containing a rusted iron key. "Clever dog," she conceded, patting his head. The key fit the padlock, though it took considerable effort to turn. Inside the shed, Beatrice found neatly arranged gardening tools, far better than the broken implements she had been using, and, most surprisingly, dozens of small clay pots containing soil and labeled with faded writing. Along the back walls stood a weathered bookstand holding a leather-bound journal. Beatrice opened it carefully, revealing her grandmother's neat script. The first entry was dated 40 years earlier. "Today I begin my great work. The monastery burns, and with it might have perished the ancient knowledge. Brother Thomas entrusted me with these seeds before they came for him. He said they are from the old world, before even our grandmothers' grandmothers walked the earth. I shall preserve them as he taught me. Beatrice frowned, turning the pages. The journal detailed careful cultivation methods, mysterious references to moon phases, and strange names she could not pronounce. Tucked between the pages was a crude map of the garden, with specific locations marked for different plantings. That night, Beatrice opened the wax-sealed box from the cottage. Inside was a letter addressed to her, written in her grandmother's hand. My dearest Beatrice, if you are reading this, I have joined our ancestors. You are always the one with the gentle hands and patient heart. The village believes me a simple old woman, perhaps touched by madness. Let them believe it. The truth is in the garden. Brother Thomas called them the seeds of salvation, plants that once fed emperors and sustained armies through famine. The knowledge was forbidden by both church and crown, for those who control food control the people. Trust Thistle. He knows where the best seeds lie buried. Begin with the clay pots in the shed, the ones marked with a spiral. Plant with the new moon. Tell no one until the first harvest. Remember, 3 drops of the spring water with each seed. I have loved you always, grandmother. Beatrice read the letter twice more, wondering if her grandmother had indeed lost her mind in her final years. Seeds of salvation? Forbidden knowledge? It seemed the ramblings of a senile woman. Still, she had nothing to lose by following the instructions. The next morning, Beatrice examined the clay pots in the shed. Several were marked with a spiral symbol, containing what looked like ordinary dried seeds. She selected one pot labeled Triticum antiquum and brought it to the newly cleared section of garden. As she worked, she noticed Thistle digging furiously near an old oak stump at the garden's edge. Always distracting me from my task, she muttered, though without real annoyance. The dog had already proven his worth by finding the key. Beatrice planted the seeds as instructed, using water from a small spring that bubbled up near the property's boundary. She had not noticed it before, hidden as it was beneath a flat stone that Thistle had pawed aside that morning. A week passed, then another. While Beatrice continued clearing the garden and repairing the cottage roof with reeds gathered from the nearby marsh, something extraordinary happened. The seeds she had planted sprouted with remarkable vigor, growing visibly from one day to the next. By the end of a fortnight, the plants stood knee-high, with thick stalks unlike any wheat she had ever seen. As Beatrice marveled at this strange crop, she became aware of being watched. Turning, she saw a man on horseback observing her from the road. He wore the fine clothes of a merchant or minor nobleman, and his expression was unreadable beneath his trimmed beard. "Good day, mistress," he called. "I am Conrad Vance, tax collector for Lord Ravenscroft. I was not aware this property had a new occupant." Beatrice curtsied, aware of her ragged appearance. "I am Beatrice Gardiner, sir. This cottage belonged to my grandmother. I have inherited it upon her passing." Conrad Vance dismounted, tying his horse to a post. He approached the garden fence, his eyes narrowing as they fell upon the unusual plants. "Interesting crop you have there," he remarked casually, though Beatrice detected something calculated in his tone. "What manner of grain is that?" Remembering her grandmother's warning, Beatrice shrugged. "I know not, sir. I found some old seeds and planted them out of desperation. Likely they will come to nothing." Conrad's gaze lingered on the plants. "Perhaps. Yet your grandmother was known for her unusual garden. Lord Ravenscroft had expressed interest in purchasing this land several times during her life. She stubbornly refused his generous offers." "I was unaware," Beatrice said carefully. "Well, now that you are here, perhaps you would consider selling? A widow alone might find a sum of money more useful than a dilapidated cottage and weed-choked garden." Before Beatrice could respond, Thistle emerged from behind the cottage, growling low in his throat at the visitor. Conrad stepped back. "Control your beast, woman." "Thistle, hush," Beatrice commanded, though secretly she was pleased by the dog's protective instinct. "Forgive him, sir. He is cautious with strangers." "Consider my lord's offer," Conrad said, mounting his horse. "I shall return in a fortnight for your answer. You would be wise to accept. These are difficult times for women alone." With that thinly veiled threat, he rode away. That night, Beatrice could not sleep. Conrad's visit had unsettled her. Why would a lord be interested in this seemingly worthless plot of land? What did her grandmother's garden truly contain that might be so valuable? Her thoughts were interrupted by thistles scratching at the cottage floor near the hearth. "Stop that, old friend," she scolded gently. But Thistle persisted until Beatrice, exasperated, examined the spot. One of the flagstones rocked slightly when pressed. Using a knife to pry it up, she discovered a small space beneath containing a metal box. Inside was another journal, older than the one in the shed, its pages yellow with age. This one was written not by her grandmother, but by the mysterious brother Thomas. It detailed his travels to distant lands where he had collected seeds of plants long forgotten in England, plants that resisted drought and disease, produced bountiful harvests, and contained remarkable properties for healing and nourishment. These ancient cultivars, one passage read, fed civilizations when Rome was yet a village. They require little water, resist the blight, and yield 3 harvests where common grains give but 1. The Church fears this knowledge would free the peasantry from dependence on their lord's charity during famine. Lord Ravenscroft particularly demanded I surrender these treasures when he learned of them, claiming all bounty of the earth belongs to nobility by divine right. I refused, and now must flee. I entrust this legacy to Margaret Gardiner, who understands the earth's secrets better than any scholar I have known. Beatrice sat back, stunned. Her grandmother had been guardian of something far more valuable than she could have imagined, knowledge that could mean the difference between starvation and plenty for common folk. The next morning, Beatrice examined her sprouting plants with new eyes. If Brother Thomas was correct, these ancient varieties could transform her fortunes, and perhaps those of the entire village, which had suffered repeated crop failures in recent years. Over the following days, Beatrice planted more of the ancient seeds, following the diagrams in her grandmother's journal. She discovered that Thistle had an uncanny ability to locate spots where the soil was particularly fertile, as if he could sense something beneath the surface that she could not. 10 days after Conrad's visit, the first plants she had sown began to develop heads of grain, far earlier than any wheat Beatrice had ever known. The stalks stood nearly as tall as she did, with fat, golden seed heads containing twice the normal number of kernels. As she marveled at this miracle, a child's voice called from the garden gate. "Mistress Gardiner? My mother sent me with a loaf of bread and some cheese. She says welcome to Willowbrook." The boy was perhaps 10 years old, thin but bright-eyed, with a shock of red hair beneath a worn cap. "That is very kind," Beatrice said, accepting the modest gifts. "What is your name, child?" "Caleb, mistress. Caleb Vincent. My mother is the village midwife." "Please thank her for her generosity, Caleb. Would you like to see my garden?" The boy nodded eagerly, and Beatrice showed him the remarkable plants. "I have never seen wheat grow so tall," he exclaimed. "It is a special kind," Beatrice explained. "My grandmother preserved the seeds." Caleb looked thoughtful. "Is that why the tax collector was asking about your garden in the tavern last night?" Beatrice felt a chill. "What did he say?" "He told the innkeeper that Lord Ravenscroft requires this land for the king's business, and that the old woman's heir would be removed if necessary. He said there were dangerous foreign plants here that might poison the village wells." Beatrice masked her alarm. "That is nonsense, Caleb. These are simply ancient varieties of ordinary grains and vegetables. Tell me, does your mother have trouble feeding your family?" The boy looked down. "Since father died in the war, yes. Half the village goes hungry in winter. The Lord's grain prices rise every year." Then perhaps I can help once my harvest comes in, Beatrice said. But for now, this must remain between us. Will you keep my secret? Caleb nodded solemnly. I swear it, mistress. After the boy left, Beatrice returned to her grandmother's journals with renewed purpose. If Conrad Vance and Lord Ravenscroft meant to seize her land, she needed to understand exactly what she was protecting. That night, a storm blew in from the west. Rain lashed against the cottage, finding its way through the partially repaired roof. As Beatrice placed buckets to catch the worst leaks, Thistle began barking frantically at the door. What is it? She asked, peering through a crack in the shutters. Through the curtain of rain, she could make out shadowy figures moving about her garden. Strangers, at least 3 of them, examining her plants by lantern light. Beatrice's heart raced. She reached for the knife she used for cooking and slipped out the back of the cottage. Moving silently along the wall, she strained to hear their conversation over the storm. These are the ones, a man's voice said. Just as Conrad described. I have never seen their like before. Take samples of everything, another directed. His lordship wants proof before he moves against the woman. Should we not just burn it all now? Asked a third. The storm would hide the smoke.
Fool.
His lordship wants the seeds intact. These plants could triple the yield of his fields and triple the price he charges in times of scarcity. Beatrice spit back a gasp. So that was Lord Ravenscroft's true interest, not to destroy her garden but to steal its bounty for his own profit. Suddenly, Thistle burst from the cottage, barking and charging at the intruders. One man cursed and swung his lantern at the dog. Leave him be, Beatrice shouted, abandoning concealment. The men turned, startled by her appearance. This is my land. Get out, she commanded with more courage than she felt. The largest of the men stepped toward her menacingly. Your grandmother was branded a witch for these foreign plants, woman. The same could happen to you. Before he could approach further, a shout came from the road. Caleb stood there with 3 village men bearing pitchforks and axes. Mistress Gardiner, are you harmed? Called one of the villagers. The intruders, seeing themselves outnumbered, retreated into the darkness. We will return with the sheriff, threatened one as they fled. Beatrice thanked her rescuers, who turned out to be Caleb's uncles and cousin. The boy came running through the storm, saying Lord Ravenscroft's men were planning mischief at your cottage, explained the eldest, a weathered man named Daniel. We may be simple folk, but we protect our own. I am grateful, Beatrice said, though I have been here barely a month. I am hardly your own yet. You are Margaret Gardiner's granddaughter, Daniel replied simply. Your grandmother saved my youngest during the last famine with her strange brews and breads when all other children were dying. That makes you one of us. After they left, promising to keep watch from the village, Beatrice turned to Caleb, who had remained behind. You risk much coming out in this storm, child. Caleb shrugged. I heard them planning in the tavern. Conrad Vance gave them coin to gather samples of your plants. He did not see me listening from the loft. Beatrice studied the boy thoughtfully. You have sharp ears and a brave heart, Caleb Vinson. Would you like to become my assistant in the garden? I could use the help, and there would be food for your family in return. The boy's eyes widened. Truly, mistress? My mother would be glad of it. I can come after my morning chores. And so Beatrice gained an ally. Over the next weeks, Caleb proved invaluable. He learned quickly, helping to plant more of the ancient varieties and carrying water from the spring. Beatrice taught him what she was learning from her grandmother's journals, how certain plants strengthened others when grown together, how the phases of the moon affected their growth, and how to save seeds properly for the next planting. The first wheat ripened fully just 30 days after planting, unheard of for ordinary grain, which typically took twice as long. When Beatrice and Caleb harvested it, each plant yielded 3 times the grain of conventional wheat. More remarkably, new shoots immediately sprouted from the cut stalks, promising a second harvest from the same planting. Beatrice ground some of the grain using a hand mill from the shed and baked a small loaf in her cottage hearth. The bread it produced was unlike any she had tasted, nutty, rich, and so sustaining that a single slice satisfied hunger for hours. She shared this miraculous bread with Caleb's family and a few trusted neighbors. Word began to spread quietly through the village about the strange and wonderful crops growing in Margaret Gardiner's old garden. Then came the day Beatrice had been dreading. Conrad Vance returned, accompanied by the sheriff and 2 armed men. "Beatrice Gardiner," the sheriff announced formally, "you are ordered to vacate this property by tomorrow's sunrise. Lord Ravenscroft has purchased the outstanding tax debt on this land, which your grandmother failed to pay for 3 years before her death." "That is false," Beatrice replied steadily. "I found her tax receipts among her papers. She paid faithfully every year." "Do you call the king's representative a liar?" Conrad demanded, his face flushing with anger. "I call no one anything," Beatrice answered. "I merely state what I know to be true." The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "Unless you can produce these receipts and the considerable sum now owed, you must leave. Those are my orders." "May I have until tomorrow evening to gather my belongings and evidence?" Beatrice asked. After a moment's hesitation, the sheriff nodded. "Until sunset tomorrow."
No later.
As soon as they departed, Beatrice turned to Caleb, who had been working nearby and had heard everything. "Run to your mother," she instructed urgently. "Tell her to spread word to those who have eaten my bread. I need as many villagers here as possible by midday tomorrow." That night, Beatrice barely slept. She gathered her grandmother's journals and the most precious of the ancient seeds, preparing for the possibility that she might indeed be forced to flee. Thistle sensed her distress, staying close to her side and occasionally whining softly. Near dawn, the dog began scratching at the floor again, but in a different spot than before, near the wall farthest from the hearth. "Not now, Thistle," Beatrice murmured. But the dog persisted with such determination that Beatrice finally investigated. This flagstone, too, concealed a hiding place. Within it she found a small iron box containing exactly what she needed, her grandmother's tax receipts for the past 10 years, each bearing Lord Ravenscroft's seal and signature. More importantly, the box contained a document bearing the royal seal, a charter from the king's grandfather granting the Gardiner family perpetual rights to the land in recognition for services rendered during a long-ago war. According to this charter, the property could not be taxed or seized by any lord, as it was held directly from the crown. By midday, as Beatrice had requested, villagers began arriving at her cottage, first a few, then dozens. Nearly half the village came, standing respectfully at her gate. Among them were the elderly who remembered her grandmother's kindnesses, mothers whose children had been saved by her remedies, and families who had tasted the remarkable bread made from Beatrice's ancient grain. When Conrad Vance arrived with the sheriff and now 6 armed men, he was visibly taken aback by the crowd. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. "Are you inciting rebellion, woman?" "I am doing no such thing," Beatrice replied calmly. "These are my neighbors, come to witness justice." She held out the tax receipts. "As you can see, Sheriff, my grandmother's taxes were paid in full." The sheriff examined the documents with a frown. "These appear authentic," he admitted reluctantly. "Furthermore," Beatrice continued, producing the royal charter, "this land was granted to my family in perpetuity by the king's grandfather. It cannot legally be seized by Lord Ravenscroft or any other noble." Conrad snatched the document, his face darkening as he read. "This changes nothing. The woman is growing foreign plants that threaten our English soil. That alone is cause for seizure." An elderly man stepped forward from the crowd. "That is false, Master Vance. I am Gilbert, once gardener to the old Duke. I recognize these plants from the ancient manuscripts in his library. They are not foreign but native to this island from times before the Romans came. They were thought lost until Margaret Gardiner preserved them. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Another villager spoke up. "My family has eaten bread from these grains. It has cured my son's wasting illness when nothing else would help. My infant sleeps through the night when I eat the porridge made from this wheat," called a young mother. One by one, the villagers testified to the benefits they had already experienced from Beatrice's plants. The sheriff looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Sheriff," Beatrice said, "I believe Lord Ravencroft's interest in my land has nothing to do with taxes or foreign plants. He wishes to possess these ancient seeds for himself, to control who may grow them and profit from their remarkable properties." Conrad's face contorted with rage. "You speak treason. These peasants have no right to such bounty. The fruits of the earth belong to their betters by divine right." His outburst confirmed everything Beatrice had suspected. The sheriff, witnessing the mood of the crowd and holding the legitimate documents in his hand, made his decision. "I find no cause to evict Mistress Gardiner from her rightful property," he declared. "The tax matter is resolved, and I see no evidence of dangerous foreign plants, merely unusual varieties of common crops." He turned to Conrad. "I suggest you inform Lord Ravencroft that this matter is closed." Conrad glared at Beatrice with naked hatred. "This is not ended," he hissed before mounting his horse and departing with his men. The villagers cheered. Daniel, Caleb's uncle, stepped forward. "Mistress Gardiner, we owe you an apology. Many of us shunned your grandmother, believing rumors that she practiced dark arts. Now we see she was preserving knowledge that could save us all from hunger." Beatrice smiled. "There is no need for apology. Instead, I have a proposal. I cannot plant and harvest these crops alone, but together, we might grow enough to feed the entire village and have surplus to sell at fair prices in neighboring towns." "What are you suggesting?" asked a farmer cautiously. "A sharing of labor and harvest," Beatrice explained. "Each family could tend a portion of these ancient crops alongside their regular fields. In return, they would keep half of what they grow and contribute half to a common store for times of scarcity. I will teach anyone willing to learn how to save the seeds properly, so we are never again dependent on Lord Ravencroft's grain." The idea spread through the crowd like wildfire. By sunset, 20 families had agreed to Beatrice's proposal. Within a week, that number had doubled. Summer passed into autumn. The ancient grains and vegetables flourished beyond all expectation, yielding 3 harvests where traditional crops gave but 1. Children who had been thin and listless grew stronger. Fewer infants died. The village granary filled to capacity for the first time in living memory. Lord Ravencroft made one final attempt to seize control, sending soldiers to burn Beatrice's fields. But the villagers had anticipated this and posted watchmen day and night. When the soldiers arrived, they found 200 determined peasants waiting, armed with tools and righteous anger. The soldiers, outnumbered and unwilling to provoke a massacre that would surely reach the king's ears, withdrew. Winter came, and for the first time in generations, no one in Willowbrook went hungry. The bread and porridge made from the ancient grains provided such nourishment that people could work longer and fell ill less frequently. Children had energy to learn and play even in the coldest months. Beatrice's cottage was transformed. The roof was properly thatched, the walls repaired, and a proper bed installed. Caleb spent so much time there learning from her grandmother's journals that he became like the son Beatrice had lost, his quick mind absorbing the ancient knowledge of plants and growing things. On Midwinter's Eve, the village gathered in Beatrice's garden, which now extended well beyond her grandmother's original plot. They brought food and drink, celebrating their newfound security with song and dance around a great bonfire. As Beatrice watched the festivities, Thistle at her feet and Caleb nearby explaining the virtues of different plant combinations to an attentive group of children, she felt her grandmother's presence as surely as if she stood beside her. "You were right, grandmother," she whispered. "The seeds of salvation indeed." The following spring, Visitors came from neighboring villages, having heard rumors of Willowbrook's miraculous escape from winter hunger. Beatrice and her apprentices, for Caleb was now joined by 6 other eager students, freely shared seeds and knowledge with any who asked. Word spread further. By midsummer, pilgrims came from as far as London to learn the secrets of the ancient grains. Among them was a royal emissary, curious about reports of extraordinary crops that resisted drought and disease. When he witnessed the bounty of Beatrice's garden and heard the full story of Lord Ravenscroft's attempts to seize the land and knowledge for himself, the emissary returned to court with a full accounting. 3 weeks later, a royal proclamation arrived stripping Lord Ravenscroft of his title and lands for treasonous withholding of agricultural knowledge vital to the realm's security. The former lord's estate was divided among the tenants who had worked it for generations, with the provision that a portion of each harvest would be devoted to the ancient varieties Beatrice had preserved. 5 years after inheriting her grandmother's seemingly worthless cottage, Beatrice Gardiner stood in the center of what had become known as the Garden of Plenty. Around her stretched acres of thriving crops, the ancient grains now growing alongside conventional varieties, strengthening them through proximity. Caleb, now 15 and tall for his age, supervised a group of apprentices from 3 kingdoms, all come to learn the methods recorded in Margaret Gardiner's journals. The village of Willowbrook had doubled in size, with new cottages and workshops constructed to house those drawn by the promise of plenty. "Did you ever imagine this?" asked Martha, Caleb's mother, who had become Beatrice's closest friend. Beatrice shook her head, watching as Thistle, gray-muzzled now but still vigilant, investigated something in the newly turned earth. "I came here expecting nothing but shelter," she replied. "Instead, I found my grandmother's true legacy, not just seeds, but hope." As if hearing his name, Thistle looked up and barked once, tail wagging. Then he returned to his digging, uncovering what appeared to be yet another ancient clay pot, its seals still intact after countless years beneath the soil. Beatrice smiled. There were still secrets to discover, knowledge to reclaim. And now she had an entire village, indeed, an expanding community that reached beyond borders, to share in both the work and the harvest. The seeds of salvation had taken root, and from them had grown not just sustenance for empty bellies, but nourishment for hungry souls.